Who were the mysterious Midianites mentioned in the Bible? Few people know that this people, direct descendants of Midian, son of Abraham, carry a fascinating and dark history filled with conflicts, alliances, and betrayals. Did you know that the Midianites, despite their proximity to Israel, were responsible for moments of great suffering for the people of God, bringing upon themselves a terrible curse? In this video, we will uncover astonishing details about Midian, showing how this people, who were born under the promise, ended up involved in epic battles and divine punishments. Stay with me until the end, because you will discover why and how the Midianites became one of the most enigmatic and controversial peoples in the Bible. Imagine the venerable patriarch Abraham, already advanced in age, but still with his heart firmly set on the promises of God, watching with faith the unfolding of what the Lord had assured him. Since the moment he was called to leave his land and head toward an unknown destination, his life came to be guided by trust in God. Now, after the death of his beloved wife Sarah, Abraham takes a new wife, Keturah. From this union, several children would be born, among them one who would give rise to a people of prominence in the biblical narrative, Midian. According to the account in Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 and 2, Keturah bore 6 sons to Abraham: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. Even though they were all legitimate descendants of the great patriarch, the divine promise had clearly been directed toward Isaac. This did not mean rejection of the other sons, but rather a distinction in the purpose and lineage chosen by God. Thus, the sons of Keturah followed their own paths, and Midian in particular became the ancestor of a people with a significant role in the scriptures, the Midianites. Over time, the Midianites established themselves as a nomadic people. Unlike the Canaanites or the Egyptians, they did not have a fixed land. They lived in constant movement, inhabiting the arid regions of northwestern Arabia and parts of the Sinai Peninsula. Their homes were simple yet ingenious tents, made from animal skins and durable fabrics that protected them from both the scorching heat of the day and the biting cold of the night. However, the Midianites were not just herders. They soon discovered that trade could guarantee not only survival, but also wealth and prestige. They became skilled merchants, traveling vast distances with camel caravans loaded with valuable goods, gold, incense, spices, and other precious items from distant lands such as southern Arabia and India. They mastered the desert trade routes with expertise, becoming specialists in the art of negotiating and transporting treasures through perilous yet extremely profitable paths. If someone was searching for something rare and precious in the ancient world, the Midianites were the ones who knew where to find it. Their caravans, known for crossing the deserts with precision and courage, were constantly seen traversing the regions of Canaan, Egypt, and Arabia. They carried with them coveted merchandise, fine and exotic items that caught the attention of kings, nobles, and great merchants. Their nomadic life gave them a unique advantage. They traveled through various territories and knew exactly how to negotiate with any people, whether Egyptian, Hebrew, Moabite, or Amalekite. But the Midianites did not walk this path alone. Since early times, they had formed close ties with the descendants of Ishmael, the eldest son of Abraham, with the Egyptian servant Hagar. Just like the Midianites, the Ishmaelites also lived a nomadic lifestyle and were dedicated to trade. The similarity between the two peoples was so strong that in many biblical passages, both appear side by side, as if they were one single nation with stories that constantly intertwined. A clear example of this connection appears in the story of Joseph, son of Jacob. When his brothers, moved by envy, decided to get rid of him, they ended up selling him to a group of merchants passing through the region. These traders were identified as Midianites and Ishmaelites, Genesis chapter 37, verse 28, which shows the closeness between the two groups. These same men took Joseph to Egypt, where he was sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer of Pharaoh. Once again, we see the Midianites involved in major commercial transactions of that time. In addition to their partnership with the Ishmaelites, the Midianites also established alliances with other desert peoples, such as the Moabites and the Amalekites. Many of these alliances had strategic purposes to strengthen commercial ties, to ensure protection in hostile regions, or even to form coalitions in times of war. As generations passed, the Midianites spread widely across the desert. Even without a centralized government like that of the Egyptians or Babylonians, their influence grew. They were present on various trade routes of the Middle East and, during certain periods, managed to dominate strategic points that connected Asia to the Mediterranean. The Midianites were led by clan chiefs, respected men, not for their titles or crowns, but for their experience in negotiations and their skill with weapons when necessary. Their nomadic way of life did not require walls or fortified cities. Instead, they lived in well-organized camps, where each group knew its place and functions. Wealth among them was not measured by imposing buildings, but by large herds, stocks of valuable merchandise, and the commercial alliances they managed to secure along the desert routes. As time went by, the Midianites continued to be mentioned in the scriptures, especially during the period when Egypt had already been established as one of the greatest empires of antiquity. Within this empire, the Hebrew people lived under the weight of oppression and slavery, and it is precisely in this context that Moses emerges, a central figure. Hebrew by birth but raised among the Egyptian nobility, Moses grew up with access to the best of Egyptian culture and education. He seemed destined for a life of prestige. However, Hebrew blood pulsed strongly through his veins, and upon witnessing the injustice against his people, something inside him awakened. On one occasion, seeing an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew, Moses was overcome by such a strong sense of justice that he ended up killing the aggressor and hiding the body in the sand. But the secret did not last. When he realized that his action was already known by others, Moses found himself forced to flee. He left behind the palaces, the privileges, and all the security that Egypt had offered him. His path now led him into the unknown, to the desert of Midian, a dry, isolated, and challenging land. It was in this new setting that Moses' destiny began to transform. Near a well, he encountered a group of women being harassed by shepherds as they tried to water their flocks. Moses intervened, defended the young women, and even helped them care for the animals. These women were daughters of Jethro, a Midianite priest, who, upon hearing of Moses' act of bravery, invited him to stay at his home. Over time, Moses settled there. He married Zipporah, one of Jethro's daughters, and embraced a new life, simple, far from the grandeur of Egypt. He was now a shepherd, leading flocks through the desert, learning to live with less, cultivating patience, and experiencing life in its rawest form. For 40 years, Moses went through a silent process of transformation without even imagining what God still had in store for him. Until, on a day like any other, something unusual happened. A burning bush appeared before his eyes, yet the fire did not consume it. Moved by curiosity, he approached. It was then that he heard the voice of God, who called him by name and gave him an unexpected mission: to return to Egypt and free the Hebrew people from slavery. Moses was completely astonished. How could he, now a simple desert shepherd, face Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world? He did not see himself as prepared, but God, with firmness and tenderness, assured him, "I will be with you." With that divine promise, Moses, who had spent 4 decades in the anonymity of Midian, finally understood that all that time had been preparation. Without knowing it, he was about to assume a crucial role, to become the greatest liberator in the history of Israel. The exodus from Egypt was not merely an escape, it was an astonishing demonstration of God's power. Pharaoh and his army were miraculously defeated, and the Hebrew people crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. Israel, now free from slavery, marched toward the Promised Land. However, the journey through the desert would be long and filled with challenges. Many obstacles would arise, and among the enemies who would stand in the way of the Hebrews, the Midianites would become one of the most notable. As the years went by and the people of Israel advanced through the desert, the surrounding nations began to grow alarmed. Under the strong leadership of Moses, that once enslaved people became increasingly numerous and determined. Neighboring peoples such as the Moabites and the Midianites began to see Israel as a real threat, not only to their territory, but also to their stability and wealth. Faced with this growing unrest, the leaders of those nations decided to act. However, instead of confronting Israel in battle, they opted for a more subtle and cunning plan: to weaken the Hebrews through a curse. To do so, they sought the help of a man known for his spiritual gifts, Balaam. Balaam was a prophet who lived in the region of Mesopotamia. He had the reputation of being someone whose word held power. What he blessed prospered, and what he cursed failed. Upon seeing Israel's advance, the king of the Moabites, Balak, sent messengers to Balaam. He offered him great riches in exchange for a single task, to place a curse upon Israel, Numbers chapter 22, verses 5 and 6. At first, Balaam did what was right. He sought the guidance of God. And the answer he received was direct and unquestionable. Do not go with them and do not curse these people, for Israel is blessed. Numbers chapter 22, verse 12. The command was clear. But Balaam's heart was already beginning to waver before the tempting offer of gold and riches that Balak's messengers had promised. Even in the face of God's response, Balaam insisted. And so God permitted him to go, but with a solemn warning. He could only say what the Lord himself would place in his mouth. It was then that an extraordinary event took place during the journey. As Balaam traveled with his donkey, the angel of the Lord appeared on the path to block him. Balaam, however, was spiritually blind and did not perceive the divine presence. His donkey, on the other hand, saw the angel and turned aside from the path 3 times to avoid confronting him. Each detour stirred Balaam's anger, and he struck the animal without understanding what was happening. Until in a surprising turn the donkey spoke. "Why are you beating me?" At that moment, God opened Balaam's eyes, and he finally saw the angel standing before him. The heavenly messenger confirmed to him that the path he was taking was dangerous, but allowed him to continue, as long as he spoke only what God commanded. When Balaam arrived at the place where Balak was waiting for him, altars were erected and sacrifices were offered. Everyone anxiously expected him to cast a powerful curse upon Israel. But to the astonishment of Balak and the Midianites, when Balaam opened his mouth, no curses came out, only blessings. Israel was blessed in front of everyone. Balak, overcome with indignation, tried to change his strategy. He took Balaam to other places, believing that perhaps in a different setting the curse might succeed. But once again, and then again, Balaam only blessed the people of God. 3 times he spoke, and 3 times he exalted Israel. In the end, Balaam even declared a prophetic word, this time announcing judgment against Israel's own enemies. And then he departed, leaving Balak and the Midianites frustrated and furious, unable to alter what God had already determined. Israel was blessed, and nothing and no one could change that. The attempt to curse Israel had completely failed. Balaam, instead of pronouncing a curse, ended up blessing the people 3 times. But the Midianites were not ready to give up. If words had no effect, they would turn to something even more subtle and dangerous. They had noticed an important secret. Israel's true strength did not lie only in its numbers or organization, but in its communion with God. As long as the Hebrews remained faithful to the Lord, no nation could defeat them. So the Midianites, in alliance with the Moabites, decided to strike at the heart of the covenant, spiritual faithfulness. The new strategy was based on seduction and idolatry. Moabite and Midianite women were sent to win over the men of Israel, not with swords but with charm, feasts, and subtle invitations. At first, the invitations seemed harmless, celebrations filled with food and drink. But behind the festivities hid a dark purpose, to draw Israel away from God. And the plan worked. Many Israelites began to give in. Attracted by the feasts, they soon found themselves involved in pagan worship, paying homage to foreign gods. The main one was Baal of Peor, a Moabite deity whose rituals involved practices morally repugnant in the eyes of God. The same people who had witnessed the miracles of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, and eaten manna in the desert were now bowing before false idols. The divine response was immediate. The wrath of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and a devastating plague began to spread among the people, claiming thousands of lives. Moses, filled with indignation, ordered a severe measure. The leaders were to eliminate all who had corrupted themselves by worshipping Baal. In this moment of crisis, a dramatic episode marked history. An Israelite, in total defiance of God's holiness, brought a Midianite woman into the camp in full view of everyone, as if nothing were wrong. That was when Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, filled with holy zeal, took a spear and with a single thrust pierced them both, putting an end to the offense before God. Numbers chapter 25, verses 6 and 8. As soon as Phinehas's act brought justice to the camp, the plague ceased. But the damage had already been done. 24,000 Israelites had lost their lives. The price of sin was high. The covenant with God had been broken, and the consequences were severe. However, the Midianites, who had instigated the fall, would not go without a response. God, seeing the betrayal and the trap laid by the Midianites against his people, ordered a reckoning. The time for retribution had come. Moses, obeying the divine command, gathered an army and sent the Israelites to war against Midian. Numbers chapter 31, verses 1 and 7. The battle was intense, but the victory was decisive. Israel triumphed with authority, eliminating 5 Midianite kings, among whom was Balaam, the same man who, although he had blessed Israel with his lips, had advised the enemies to corrupt the people through idolatry and seduction. With his death, Israel punished not only the physical aggressors, but also the spiritual architect of deception. However, even with that crushing defeat, the Midianites did not vanish from history. They were not completely annihilated. Time would show that further confrontations were yet to come, for the descendants of Midian, though weakened, would continue to cross Israel's path in the chapters that followed in the biblical narrative. As the years went by, Israel once again began to tread dangerous paths. After the death of Moses and the conquest of the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership, it was expected that the people would remain faithful to the Lord. But without constant leadership, the Israelites began to adopt the customs of neighboring nations, once again plunging into idolatry. It was in this context of unfaithfulness that God allowed the Midianites to re-emerge as an instrument of discipline. For 7 years they dominated and humiliated Israel. Their attacks were relentless. Like swarms of locusts, they invaded the harvests, plundered the fields, and stole the livestock, leaving the people in complete misery. Judges chapter 6, verses 1 and 6. They did not come alone. They were joined by the Amalekites and other eastern tribes, forming an army of raiders that ravaged the land like a living plague. The Israelites were completely weakened. They could no longer defend their lands, and their crops were destroyed even before harvest. Little or nothing remained to feed their families. Fear had spread like a shadow over the people, and many no longer lived in their homes. They had fled to caves, crevices in the mountains, and improvised shelters, trying to escape the constant invasions. Hunger, insecurity, and humiliation had become part of daily life for the nation chosen by God. Without strength and without hope, the people of Israel did what they had done in other times of desperation. They cried out to the Lord. And God, faithful to his covenant, listened. The time had come to act. However, as in so many other instances, the Lord did not choose someone imposing, nor a renowned warrior to lead the change. He chose someone unlikely, Gideon, an ordinary man, insecure and filled with fear. The beginning of Gideon's story takes place precisely in this dark setting. He was not gathering armies, nor training for battle. On the contrary, he was hiding, threshing wheat inside a winepress, Judges chapter 6, verse 11. A winepress was a place used to press grapes, not to thresh wheat. But Gideon was there, hidden from the enemy, trying to save the little food he could, far from the eyes of the Midianites who were plundering everything around him. It was in that moment, in the midst of fear and the silent routine of survival, that the angel of the Lord appeared before him, and said something that seemed to make no sense at all. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon probably looked around, surprised, perhaps imagining those words were not meant for him. How could he be called mighty when he was hiding, afraid, merely trying to protect a bit of wheat? But God saw something in Gideon that he himself could not see. In the presence of the angel of the Lord, Gideon did not hide what was in his heart, a mixture of pain, doubt, and frustration. With a sincere voice, he poured out, "If the Lord is really with us, why are we going through all of this? Where are the miracles our ancestors spoke of, those mighty deeds of the Exodus? Now it seems that God has abandoned us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." But the Lord, unmoved by Gideon's insecurities, looked at him firmly and replied, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the power of the Midianites. I am the one sending you." Even with such a clear command, Gideon still saw himself as someone incapable of fulfilling such a calling. In a humble tone, he tried to argue, "Lord, how can I deliver Israel? My family is the humblest in the entire tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." But God reaffirmed his promise, "I will be with you, and you will defeat the Midianites as if you were fighting against only one man." Gideon did not yet fully understand, but something had begun to change within him. Little by little he realized that God does not choose the strongest in the eyes of the world, but transforms the weak into instruments of power. And so, the insecure young man took his first step toward the leadership that would change the destiny of his nation. Before marching to war, however, something essential had to be done. Gideon needed to learn to truly trust in God. His first mission began at home. The Lord commanded him to destroy the altar of Baal that stood on his father's property, and in its place to build an altar to the true God. Gideon obeyed, but he did it at night, afraid of how the people might react. When morning came and the people discovered what had happened, many were outraged, but it also became clear that God was working through him. Next, Gideon summoned the men of Israel for battle. The call was answered quickly, and 32,000 soldiers presented themselves. However, God once again surprised him. "This army is too large. If they win with these numbers, they will think it was by their own merit. I want them to trust in me, not in their strength." So God gave a new instruction. All who were afraid could return home, and with that, 22,000 withdrew, leaving only 10,000 warriors. But the Lord was not finished shaping the victory. "There are still too many. Take them to the stream, and there I will show you who should remain," said the Lord. Gideon obeyed without hesitation. In the next test, the separation was done in an unexpected way. Those who drank the water by bringing it to their mouths with their hands were chosen. In the end, only 300 men remained. It was a ridiculously small number compared to the vast enemy. And precisely for that reason, it was perfect for God to show that the victory would not come by human strength, but by his own power. Gideon now led a handful of warriors against a sea of enemies. Humanly speaking, it was an impossible mission, but God had already outlined the details of the plan. That night, the Lord instructed Gideon to go down quietly to the Midianite camp. There he heard something unexpected. 2 enemy soldiers were talking, and one shared a strange dream. He had seen a barley loaf rolling and knocking over the tents of the camp. The other interpreted it without hesitation. "This can only mean the sword of Gideon. God has delivered the Midianites into his hands." Those words were like a breath of courage to Gideon. He returned to the Israelite camp, renewed in faith. Immediately, he divided the 300 men into 3 groups of 100. But instead of powerful weapons, he gave each man a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch hidden inside the jar. "Watch what I do," he said. "When I blow the trumpet, you will do the same. Break the jars, raise the torches, and shout loudly, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" In the stillness of night, while the enemy slept, the 300 men took position around the Midianite camp. Then, in perfect coordination, the trumpet sounded, the jars shattered, the torches lit up the darkness, and the shout echoed through the valley like thunder. "For the Lord and for Gideon." Chaos erupted among the Midianites. Waking in panic, confused by the noise and the flashing lights, they believed they were surrounded by a massive army. In their desperation, they began attacking one another. Total disorder followed. Many fled, and Gideon and his men pursued them, completing the victory. With only 300 men and not a single sword raised at first, God defeated a vast army. The message was clear. True strength does not come from numbers, but from trust in the Almighty God. The defeat that the Midianites suffered at the hands of Gideon was not just another battle. It was the final blow to a people who, for years, had risen against Israel and challenged the authority of the Most High God. Once feared for their ferocity and destructive raids in the desert, the Midianites would never again hold a position of strength or influence. On that memorable night, when only 300 men, guided by the Lord, sowed terror in the enemy camp, something profound happened. The vast Midianite army crumbled, not by human swords, but by the power of obedience and faith. The survivors, overtaken by fear, fled in disarray, desperately trying to regroup. But the hand of God pursued them. Gideon, determined, did not rest until the mission was completed. Zebah and Zalmunna, the last kings of Midian, were captured and brought before Gideon. There, the fate of the Midianite nation was sealed. They, who had led the oppression against God's people, paid with their lives. It was the end of an era for a people who had chosen to confront the God of Israel instead of honoring the covenant that once existed. Judges chapter 8 verses 10 and 21. After that humiliating defeat, the Midianites never rose again as a power. Those who once dominated desert trade, known for their caravans and skilled negotiations, became nothing more than a distant memory. Ironic, since this same people were once linked to Moses' journey when he took refuge in Midian and was welcomed by Jethro, a priest of that land. But the ancient ties with Abraham's descendants were broken. By choosing idolatry and oppression, they severed their connection with the divine purpose and reaped the consequences. Although the name Midianites appears in later mentions in the scriptures, they no longer represent any threat. They became an insignificant people, without military power, without political influence. Those who once left Israel in ruins and drenched in fear were now merely echoes of the past. What remained was the testimony of God's justice, an eternal reminder that no one stands against the Lord and remains standing. The journey of the Midianites carries a deep and eternal lesson. God is sovereign, and his justice never fails. This people fell because they chose to confront Israel and corrupt the hearts of the people through idolatry and sin. They tried to turn the Israelites away from the Lord's path, but God, who never ignores evil, acted with justice, and judgment was inevitable. In contrast, Gideon's story reveals the transforming power of faith and obedience. A common man, timid and insecure, became an instrument in the hands of God to defeat a vast army. This teaches us a powerful truth. Victory does not depend on strength, numbers, or human strategy, but on the presence and direction of the Almighty God. How many times do we feel like Gideon, fragile, small in the face of our problems, thinking we are not capable? But the Word shows us that when we place our trust in God, He empowers us, lifts us up, and leads us to victories beyond human logic. The Midianites trusted in themselves, in their idols, and in their strength, and because of that they fell. Israel, even stumbling in moments of weakness, always found restoration when they turned back to the Lord. That pattern repeats itself. Repentance brings deliverance, and the faithfulness of God never fails. The story of the Midianites is not just a record of the past, it is a living warning. It shows us that no enemy, no matter how great they may seem, can withstand the power of God. In moments of fear, oppression, or uncertainty, we can remember Gideon's story and be certain. If God is with us, no matter the size of the challenge, victory is certain. Thus ended the influence of the Midianites. But the message this story conveys remains alive. God honors those who seek Him sincerely and never abandons those who trust in Him. And now we want to know, did you already know the story of the Midianites in the Bible? Write in the comments. Share this teaching with others. Give the video a like and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving content like this. See you next time.